Hi.
Hello. Hi.
Thank you.
Can you see us?
I can see you, yes. Hello. Hi. Welcome. Are you ready for me to get started?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. Well, hi. I do have some slides, so I will share them shortly. But just before we start, how many of you currently use Pardot?
No.
Okay. How many of you are brand new to Pardot? Okay, great. Okay, so this is going to be a very, very kind of intro session. I've got a few slides, and then I'll take you through a demo so you can see how you would kind of put together a journey in the first place. So a little bit of background, a little bit of an example, and I'll leave some time for questions at the end if you have any. Anything you'd like to ask before we start, or anything you'd particularly like me to cover?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm a core Salesforce guy.
Okay.
How does it fit into core, basically, right?
Well, I have a slide. Yeah, I have a slide that will hopefully show that. So I'll take you through that, and then if you do have more questions, feel free to ask them later.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Is it possible to do an easy migration from Marketing Cloud into Pardot?
I mean, it very, very much depends on the setup. My guess would be that easy is probably not how I would describe it, but it depends on your data model and the kind of journeys, etc., that you've got set up already. So if you've got something simple and straightforward and it all fits, then yeah, sure. But if not, it can get a bit more complicated.
Then you have to copy paste all the HTML for all the templates that you have.
Yeah, I mean, that wouldn't be the tricky bit. The tricky bit would be the data model. But I've got a slide about Pardot and Marketing Cloud, so we can have a look at that, and then maybe I go into more depth at the end. Cool. Okay, so let me try and share my screen. Okay. How do I hide this? Okay, can you see my slides?
Yep.
Yes.
Great. Okay, cool. So yeah, this is Pardot Get Set Go. A little bit about me. So I'm the user group leader of the UK B2B Marketers Group, formerly known as the Pardot London User Group. I am a marketing automation consultant at Empower. We actually have an office in Munich, and I blog at salesforceben.com and the Drip. You can follow me on Twitter, and I very enthusiastic about Pardot, so big fan. So what is Pardot? I'm sure that most of you know already that you can send emails from Pardot, but obviously it does so much more than that. So you can also build forms and landing pages, really nice and easy. End users can do it. It's a really nice, simple piece of functionality. You can track activity data, so you can track if a prospect or if a person visits your website, you can track the pages that they visit, and you can see what they're interested in and link all of that back with your data. You can build tailored nurture programs like the one we can see here. So rather than just sending a single email, you can really kind of set up these journeys that are much more interactive and much more tailored to a specific route or path that prospect might take. We have systems in place to prioritize the hottest leads. So rather than just provide your salespeople with a big dump of leads that have filled out a form on your website in the past week, you can actually prioritize that with the people who are most interested, and also the people that most likely fit one of your key buying personas. And you can sync all of this data back to Salesforce and have stuff from Salesforce sync back over. There's a really nice two-way sync. So it's really useful to kind of tie in together. And obviously what that means as well is that anything you can't do in Pardot, you can pretty much push that back to Salesforce and do a lot more creative things with Salesforce. So it's that flexibility is really nice. So as we were just talking about, we have Pardot on one side and we have Marketing Cloud on the other side. There are differences. They are definitely more suited to some scenarios than others. And I do have clients as well that actually use both. So it is possible and sometimes it's necessary. But there are definite areas where you would split them out. So Pardot, and this is in brackets, Pardot is marketed by Salesforce as the B2B solution. So anything that goes for a business rather than straight to the consumer, while Marketing Cloud they position as the business to consumer one. I put that in brackets because that's not always the case. I do have some B2C customers who use Pardot, and I do have some B2B customers who use Marketing Cloud. So it does vary, but you'll see why. So Pardot syncs very nicely to Sales Cloud and Service Cloud. It does have an API, but it's very limited. So just beware that it really doesn't sync very well with external systems. But Marketing Cloud is kind of built around external data. So, you can bring in all those tables from external systems, things like e-commerce, purchase data, etc. And if you're looking to use that kind of data, that's when you would use Marketing Cloud. Pardot is, it's built for B2B, so it's built for the lead nurturing piece, and it's got scoring and engagement, activity tracking, all of that kind of stuff built in, and it's really easy to set up. Whereas Marketing Cloud is much better suited to transactional things like abandoned shopping cart interactions. And so in general, this kind of brings us to the main points and the main difference. So Pardot is really suited to longer, more considered purchases. So most B2B sales cycles are a lot longer than B2C ones. But an example of a B2C long considered purchase that you might use would be if you're buying a house, for example. So it's anything like that people need a little bit of encouragement to get past the line. You'd consider using Pardot. And Marketing Cloud is much better suited to shorter transactions, e-commerce, anything that you just buy online, click, and you want them to get an email straight away, and it's just done like that. So they're kind of the key differences. You can obviously go into a lot more detail around that, but that's when we would position one or the other. So which objects can you sync to Pardot? So the first thing to notice is that Pardot, every record in Pardot is called a prospect. So any person in Pardot is a prospect, which can be confusing, but in reality it means, they might be prospects, they might be existing customers, they might be employees, they might be competitors, just any person in Pardot is referred to as a prospect. Prospects sync back to Salesforce to the lead, contact, and person account objects. You do have to request support to set up person accounts for you if that's something that you want activated, but it's still quite straightforward to set up. And then there are a couple of other objects that you can sync back to Pardot. So you can read accounts and opportunities, and if you've purchased them as an add-on, or if you're on the enterprise, or I can't remember what it's called now, sorry, but whatever the highest tier edition is, and you have custom objects enabled in your Pardot org, then you can read those in Pardot and you can run segmentations on them. But for accounts, opportunities, and any custom objects, you can't update them in Pardot and push that information back to Salesforce. So you couldn't, for example, have somebody fill out a form and then update their account info based on that. So you can use it for segmentation, but you can't update. And there is a selective sync. Currently, if you have the V1 connector, you have to, if you do want to limit which leads and contacts get synced back to Pardot from Salesforce, you have to do that using sharing rules. So Pardot operates on a connector user. So basically anything that connector user, which is just a license in Salesforce, it's a user, it can be a real user. Anything that user can see will sync back to Pardot. So if you want to limit that, you can do that using your security settings. There is a V2 connector, which is being rolled out now for brand new orgs, and there is a beta that you can get enrolled in if you are an existing org, that will make that process a lot easier, and you can actually just choose using drop-down criteria rather than having to change all of your connector settings in all of your sharing settings in Salesforce. So that's we're all very happy to see that one. Okay, and then so going into how Pardot works and the kind of the assets, etc., that you would work with in Pardot. The first thing to understand about Pardot is that in most cases, you will organize your prospects into lists. And these are kind of what you would use to send an email to, what you would use to start an engagement studio program. They're essentially the audience for that engagement. And in Pardot, we have two types of lists. We have static lists and dynamic lists. And the names are quite self-explanatory. So static lists do not change. So you have to add a prospect to that list by a rule or a completion action or manually. And then they will stay on that list until another rule of something removes them. So if you add people to a static list, you know that they're going to stay on that list until you do something to remove them. Whereas dynamic lists are based on criteria. So I hope that's big enough for you to see, but you can set rules here to say, everyone that meets this criteria, I want them to be added to this list. And what's really nice about dynamic lists is that they continuously update. So, in this example here, we have prospect opportunity stage is discovery. If the prospect if their opportunity was to move to the next stage, say it's called working, the list would update and they would actually drop out of that list because they no longer meet the criteria. So dynamic lists are a really useful piece of functionality when you want to keep your journey audiences up to date. And then we also have two types of emails. So we have emails or list emails and email templates. And this can be a little tricky to understand or to kind of wonder why do you need these two types of emails? Essentially, email templates are to be reused, and you can use them in automations, and you can use them in engagement studio programs, in those nurture journeys that we've been talking about. And when you build an email or a list email, that is a one-time send to a list. So if you're just getting started out in Pardot, my recommendation would be always build an email as an email template, because then you've got that template that you can reuse again. And the email is just a one-time send, like a newsletter for that month. And a little bit more theory before we dive into the demo. So another important thing to understand around forms, landing pages, and layout templates. So you can have, there are a few different types of forms in Pardot. So you can have basic forms and form handlers. So a form can, Pardot forms have some really nice functionality that we'll look at in a second. And they are really easy for end users to use because you don't need to use any code or anything. You can just get them set up and they will go once you have the design set, obviously. Whereas a form handler is actually a form that is coded into your website. And this, you kind of integrate this with Pardot. So you just change the point that the form posts to. So you can use forms on your website. You can use Pardot forms. You can embed them in an iframe, and you can use a form handler to just point existing form code that you already have on your website into Pardot. And then you can also use Pardot forms on Pardot landing pages. So again, this is really nice for marketing end users who have no coding, they don't have access to someone who can help them out on the website. If you've got a kind of a template built for that landing page and you've got that styling done already, you can just quickly reproduce a new landing page with a new form, with no design required. So it's really useful. And yeah, in Pardot, the layout template governs the styling for landing pages and forms. So we won't go into too much detail on that because I think it's not what we need to know today. But you'll see when we go through the example. And then finally, Engagement Studio. So there are 3 different things, and this is where you get those nurture journeys. And there are 3 main things that you can do in Engagement Studio. You can perform an action, which is something we would do. So for example, sending an email to the prospect. You can listen for a trigger, which is something like looking to see if they've opened an email. And you can look for a rule. So this is something that we would know about the prospect. So this would typically be something like looking at a custom field value, or, is the prospect in this country? But I've been doing a lot of talking, so let's dive in and I can actually show you what this looks like. So this is Pardot's Engagement Studio, and I will just create one now. Would look like. So we've got, so the first thing you have to do is, can you still see me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, cool. The first thing you need to do is add a recipient list. So remember I said the lists are kind of how you organize your prospects in Pardot. So I've just created one earlier for a demo, so I'm going to add that as our recipient list for this journey. And you can also add a suppression list. So let's say that I know that there are a few people that are on this list that I don't want them to receive any emails. I don't want them to be part of this journey. Then actually you would, if they were on a suppression list, you can add them to the suppression list and prevent them from joining the journey and receiving any of those emails or having any of those actions performed. And you can also set your emails to only go out during business hours. That's only in one time zone though, so bear in mind if your email Engagement Studio program will be affecting people across multiple time zones, you probably want to think about either turning that off or extending the hours. Obviously we are out of business hours now, so I'm going to turn that off. And you can repeat the Engagement Studio programs as well. There are some scenarios when you would do that, but for now we'll just say we just want this person to go through once. And then we've got this really nice canvas here, which is where we can really start building things out. But before we actually start building out the journey and what we want to happen, I'd like us to take a look at the form, and let's build out the form that would add people to the list to add them to the journey. So let's imagine a scenario where we are asking people to sign up for an event. We're hosting a party. We want our hottest prospects to come along so that we can give them some really nice food and drink and convince them to buy from us. So this is the form builder wizard in Pardot. These are kind of the default names of default fields. So we can see we've got first name, last name, they're required. We've got email here, which is also required. Company is not. I'm going to add a new field and I'm going to ask what country somebody is in. Just going to check. And if I'm going to click load default data, and that has populated. And yeah, I think that should be required. And actually, I also want to know whether we have confirmed opt-in for these people. So I'm going to click, okay, actually, no, that's a bad example. Sorry, let's do something different. I would also like to let's just ask for their phone number. But there's some really, so there's some nice functionality that we can do within the form that you can, that's much more useful than you can do from basic form functionality. So we've got things here like, you'll notice we've got additional tabs called progressive and dependent. So dependent fields work in much the same way as they do in Salesforce, but this way we can say, you know, if this field equals, let's say this, actually, let's have a look on. This is much more logical. So let's say if this field, so this is our country field. If this field equals, in fact, yeah, if this field equals the United Kingdom, then we want to ask them for their phone number. So we can see now here that this field is dependent. So this field will only display on the form if they enter United Kingdom into country. So this is really useful when you're using pick list fields or drop down fields and things like that. And there's another thing you can do as well, which is the progressive profiling, which is really interesting. So let's look at job title, for example. So you know, when you're hosting a form on your website, you don't want to ask for too much information because your prospects won't complete it. It looks like it's too much work for them to do, so they won't do it. So we have this progressive option, which is really nice, which is show this field only if the prospect already has data in the following fields. So actually, if the prospect has previously completed a form, or we've loaded the information from Salesforce and we already know what company they are at, then we will ask them what their job title is. Otherwise, they won't see this field. So it's a really nice way of kind of gradually getting more information about your prospects, but without overloading them by asking for too much data in one go. So nice. That's just a few things you can do with Pardot forms. They're really quite powerful. So I definitely recommend using them over using Pardot form handlers, etc., if you can. And so this is where you would choose a look and feel for your form. So just, oops. I'm just going to use this one for now, and I'll set the submit text. And we can set thank you content as well, so it will just automatically display this content. I'm just going to disable this. And then we've got this interesting thing down here. So this is completion actions. So these are basically actions or rules that will fire whenever somebody submits this form. So if we're using this form to sign people up for our event, then the two things, well, the first thing that we want to do is we want to add them to the list for the journey so that they can join that journey and receive those emails for that content. So just from within the form, I can say, let's add them to the list. Let's add them to Engagement Studio demo. And there we go. So I'll click confirm and save. And we have right here, you can see that we've got our form completed, our form here, and we also, because my my prospect record isn't currently cookied, so my browser isn't cookied, Pardot doesn't know who I am. I've got no company information, so it hasn't asked me for that phone field. So I'm not being overloaded with content. But if I would now fill out United Kingdom, oh, sorry, it hasn't asked me for the job title field, but now because I've filled out United Kingdom, that has hit the criteria for me to be asked what my phone number is. So just nice functionality there. But anyway, so we've got our form built, we've got the list built already. So now that we know how people are going to join the journey, let's actually think about what content we want to send them. So the first thing we want to do is send them an email. And an email would be an action. This is something that we want to do. So let's find send email. I have training email 1. Let's just pretend that this is a really snazzy email that says, thank you for registering for our event. We're so excited to see you. And I want that to go out immediately because they've just signed up. They need to get their confirmation. And then actually I want to check whether they've opened that email, because if they haven't opened that email, then I'll probably want to send them it again just to make sure that they've got that information. So this time I'm going to look for a trigger. So a trigger is where we listen for something that the prospect does. And in this case, it will be, have they opened the email? So I'll click for the trigger, click for email open. And now we have 2 time steps here for triggers. And this is where it gets interesting. So we can have a general wait step. So if we set a wait step of 3 days, and I sent the email today, in 3 days time, so on Sunday, Pardot would look at the system and say, did this prospect open this email? If yes, then they go one way. If no, then they'd go the other. But actually, let's say that we want to perform an action as soon as we know that they've opened the email. So this would be up to a maximum of 3 days. And what that means is that if we send the email today and the prospect opens the email today, then they'll go down the yes branch today. If the prospect opens the email tomorrow, they'll go down the no branch tomorrow. But after 3 days, if they haven't, everybody who hasn't opened the email will go down the no path. So it's just a way of kind of playing with those timelines. So let's
question real quick.
Yeah.
You're based in UK, right?
Yes.
Okay. So one of the things is those clicky open email magic, right? Might not be feasible on our legal terms over here.
What do you, so the emails are done by pixels, by tracking pixels.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the whole magic goes boom if my customer or somehow blocks those pixels, right? Or maybe I don't even have consent of any tracking for his or her actions.
So the thing that prospects, sorry, I'm losing my voice. The thing that prospects would typically block are the cookies on your browser. So, so that is when, so I think you saw, we had a cookie notification pop up here. That is when, that's when we wouldn't be able to track their activity. So if they opt out of those, we wouldn't be able to see what pages they visit on the website. The email opens is different. I haven't seen a case or heard of a case of anyone opting out of those, because actually that's tracked by a pixel, and we won't. So we wouldn't, if they didn't. We'd always be able to see whether they opened it, but we wouldn't still be able to track their activity unless they clicked a link and had cookies enabled in their browser.
So I used to work in the industry of hospitals and research labs, and they had high security that their email didn't have such fancy HTML,
Yeah.
Meaning that the pixels could not be downloaded. So
Yeah.
sometimes it depended on the customer. Sometimes it would get recorded and sometimes it would not. So whenever it would not get recorded, I wouldn't take that as automatic no, not open. So
Yeah.
it's actually a good point. So it's not only related to our GDPR rules, but rather the idea that pixels may not be able to get downloaded.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, so it's if you, and that's it. So most, and it depends on the business. Most businesses do still allow HTML, but like, yeah, as you say, some businesses or organizations are much more, they have higher levels of security. So you would only get the text email through. And Pardot does include a text version with every send, but you're right, that wouldn't have the tracking pixel. So yeah, it's not related to GDPR, but that has always been the case for email marketing for as long as it's been around. So what we would typically
Jessica?
There, no issues. There it goes.
Not our network for sure. Can you message? Yeah.
Perform another action, which
Let me ask her to start.
Yeah, this year we lost you for like
Well, you're
30 seconds. If you could reiterate.
Well, look above her wireless is going. Quick bathroom break.
It's a break time.
sorry, I think my internet dropped out, which is helpful. Okay, so can you see my screen again?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So yeah, so let's say that in this case, we would, if somebody did open the email, we would notify the user. I'll just leave that blank. But can you hear me?
Yep. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so we would notify the user, but actually what we would do, let's say that if somebody does, for example, in the email, we wanted to offer somebody a free drink if they click a link. And this is the kind of thing that we would normally encourage people to do, because clicking a link, you can track much more, what's the word? Well, it's much more reliable to track than email opens for that exact reason. Because yeah, if somebody doesn't download the images in their email, then if they kind of look at your email in junk mail as well, then that open wouldn't get tracked. So so in this case, we'll have a look to see whether somebody clicks the link in that email. And we could choose a specific link. So I don't think we have any links actually in this training template. But again, I'd say wait. Yeah. So, and in this case, yeah, if somebody clicks this email, then we could do something like, all right, we will let's update a field to say that yes, they're allowed this free drink. So I haven't built this for this particular example, but let's just say, yeah, if they click that specific link, then we can update a field value, and that will obviously sync back to Salesforce. So we can sync that back to Salesforce, and we've got that information in Salesforce as well. And then we'd obviously do different things based on whether or not they didn't click that link. So if they didn't click the link, we probably want to send them another email to encourage them to do something else. So we would we send them the same email again because we don't think they're interested. And again, we could look again to see, okay, trigger, have they opened this email? Have they clicked this link? So there are a few things you can do there, but then there's also there are many more powerful things that you can do as well. So if we go back to this person that has clicked a link here, they've registered their interest. If we go into, if we go into this, what we can actually do is where this is really starts to get powerful, is we can add them to a Salesforce campaign. And obviously within that campaign, you can do a lot of reporting, etc. from it. But you can also use this to power other automations within Salesforce itself. So that's really useful. And you can also as well, and this one's really useful, actually create a Salesforce task. So we can say, hey, your lead is interested, and that will go to their assigned user. And if they don't have an assigned user, we probably want to assign them one. So let's go back up here and say, right, another action. Let's assign them to, and we can hear, so this is really useful. So we can assign them to a user that we specify. We can assign them to a queue that's been set up. We can assign them to a group, which is a Pardot version of a queue as well. So you can use the Salesforce version or the Pardot version. But you can also use the active assignment rules that are set up in Salesforce. And that's really handy because it means you don't have to kind of keep going back and updating things in different places. You can just use the rules that you've already built in Salesforce. So yeah, big fan of that one. So there are a lot of things that we can do there, but we can even go even further in and actually segment within the journey itself. So we've had a look at actions and we've had a look at triggers, but we haven't yet had a look at rules. And these are things that you can that you know about a user, about a prospect. So you can go in and have a look. So who are they assigned to? Which are they assigned to a specific user? Are they assigned to a specific queue? Have they been assigned? You know, maybe if they have been assigned, we can ignore them. But if they haven't, maybe that's the point at which we want to assign them. And the point at which you assign a prospect is important in Pardot because that is when they are pushed to Salesforce. So obviously you can't have a record in Salesforce without an owner. So Pardot will create that lead. In most cases, it creates a lead in Salesforce from Pardot at the moment that you assign them to an owner. So that's really useful. But you can also look at other things. So, you know, assignment status, what grade are they? We haven't talked about grade, but that's another way of segmenting. Are they in a particular list? So if you have multiple lists in Pardot, you might want to see if you've already organized them into something else. What campaign are they in? What field information do we have about them? So any default or custom field that you have that you've built in Pardot, and that can pull any information through from Salesforce as well. You can use that to segment within your journey. And then also whether they're in a particular Salesforce campaign. And then finally, whether their score is. So let's say if someone's score, and this shows their activity, we'll have a look, I've got a slide, we'll have a closer look at that in a second. But if someone's score is greater than 100 and we know that they're really interested in us, then yeah, absolutely, let's create a task straight away for our sales team and say, please call this lead. And that will go straight to their owner, their assigned user. Let's set this high priority. And yeah, and you can set all of that today with information, etc. So it's really nice once you start to kind of think about the ways that you can interact with Salesforce, but also the different paths and the different journeys that you can send your prospects down. And there are many different uses for this. So obviously I've used this quite messy example of signing up for an event. But you could do it for things like monthly renewals. If you know someone's coming to the end of a contract and you want them to renew, you can set emails to go out on a timeline to get them to renew. You know, there's so many different things that you can do with Engagement Studio. So it's yeah, really a really useful tool. So just quickly, I've got a couple more slides to share with you, and then I'll open it up for questions. Sorry?
I wanted to ask a question real quick. Where do you set the goals and the campaign analysis after it completes?
So you don't. Pardot doesn't have goals in the same way that Marketing Cloud does. Obviously, you can add everyone to a Salesforce campaign and report on those kind of things. What you would do if you wanted someone to drop out if they for example, completed a purchase, if their opportunity closed won, you would do that using the recipient list and suppression list. So for example, you might have as a suppression list a dynamic list which says prospect opportunity status is closed won, and then anyone when they reach that closed won stage, they would be added to the suppression list, which means they drop out of the journey. So it doesn't have goals in the same way, but you can you can kind of be creative around that. And reporting, there is a reporting tab as well, but that just and what that shows you is the percentage of different kind of the different paths that people go down. So here, how many people opened? 60% of people opened, but 40% of people didn't.
You can do the measurements in the campaigns then. I mean, engagement, then you can put all data, and then you have your underlying.
So do you mean so what you can do now with connected campaigns is you associate every email with a Salesforce campaign. And then obviously all of your prospects you would also associate with the same campaign. And then what you can do on the campaign in Salesforce is there's some nice kind of reporting components that you can add to the page layout that track your email performance. They track your landing page performance. They track all those percentages against the campaign. So, so you can see all of that data at the campaign level in Salesforce. Okay, does that answer your question?
Can any part of this flow can be used as component so that we can use it? I mean, can any part of this engagement flow can be used as a component so that we can use it in other flows if possible?
So like copy
a reuse functionality maybe.
What? So do you mean what we've built here? Could we copy that to use in another program?
Yeah.
Yeah. So actually, from within. And it all auto saves as well, something Marketing Cloud doesn't do. But within, so from this page, I can't remember what I called it. What did I call it? Training.
Somebody paid attention.
I don't think it was this one actually, but anyway, you can click here and click copy, and that will just copy and create the same journey again. So that's useful. So it is really nice kind of user-friendly piece of functionality. It's definitely much more straightforward, and marketing users can use it in a way that that they struggle with in the Marketing Cloud, which is a bit more technical. But yeah, so that's really nice. Okay. All right, and then I'll very quickly, just a couple more things I want to talk about, and then I'll open it up completely for questions. So, so we talked briefly about this, but Pardot has two things that you can use to kind of prioritize your leads, and these are scoring and grading. So scoring is based on prospect activity, and that shows how interested a prospect is in you. And that's an indicator of how many forms have they filled out, what content have they downloaded, how many pages have they visited on your website, and that will accumulate into a score that shows their overall interest. And then grading is based on demographic data, which is how interested we are in them. So if their job title is MD or CFO, then that might be an ideal buying persona for you. So you would give them a high grade based on that. So it's a really useful way to use together combined. They're really it's really useful for your sales teams to be able to look at a list and say, okay, well, this person's got a really high score and they've got a high grade, so I know they're an ideal customer. This is the person I'm going to speak to today. And then finally, just a couple of little things to be aware of. I know we talked briefly about the API. So yes, there is a Pardot API. It is quite limited, so avoid using it if possible. It's always better to do integrations into Salesforce and then kind of just sync back and forth from Salesforce. But it is there and it is possible.
For the next live presentation, I will also go in some kind of network latency errors. I'll just stop on.
Still online.
So good.
I was looking for copy. Yeah, I don't know. It's what's the name from the guy who's in short? Yeah. Quick question. You asked for each component to copy it into another thing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You cannot do this in Pardot.
Okay.
You can do the marketing cloud, but just for this specific journey, you can't just copy it from journey A.
Okay.
In journey B.
Okay.
Not possible.
Okay.
Everything I see there, marketing job wins.
No, yeah, but
No.
for you, because you are a technical.
And you can code for 10 weeks until the thing is done and don't spend half a day fixing a form.
Hi, sorry. Hopefully I can last long enough to answer your questions. But yeah, so just quickly, sync errors here. This is where prospects have stopped syncing between Pardot and Salesforce. Things like deduplication is a common one. So if you've got duplicate rules in Salesforce, then that would that would demonstrate your that would stop the sync from happening. But also anything like validation rules is a big one. So we often allow the Pardot connector user to bypass validation rules just to prevent that sync from happening. Because if somebody fills out the form and that lead doesn't get pushed to Salesforce because the sync isn't happening, then that is a big issue. So yeah, so just if you are using Pardot, keep an eye on your sync errors. And yeah, they'll mostly be data validation rules, and deduplication rules. Okay, and then yeah, and just something else to be aware of, that Pardot, you can have as many users as you want. It doesn't have licenses. You can have everyone as a user on there if you like. But the pricing, the scalability on the pricing comes from your database size of mailable prospects. So that means that anyone that's unsubscribed doesn't count against your limits. But if you had 100,000 prospects that you wanted to import into Pardot and you wanted to email them all, they weren't unsubscribed, then you would need to upgrade your mailable database size. Okay, so I do apologize for dropping out, or for my internet to keep dropping out. I am in the office, so it should be reliable. But yeah, do you have any more questions for me?
Yes, one of the triggers was link clicked. So does it work with personalized links? Because marketing cloud, for instance, you cannot make an engagement split based on an email address which has a parameter which is the, like, I don't know, the ID of the person. So any kind of personalized links are not usable in any kind of engagement.
Yeah. So do you mean, sorry, if you're passing the like their email address somewhere else if they click that link?
Well, if I have the link and have a parameter on it, which is the ID, because on the landing page I want to track which person it was or whatsoever. So personalized link. Does this
Yep.
work?
Yep, so there are no limitations. What you can do is you can also use custom redirects, which we didn't talk about, but they even work on third parties as well. So you could put them on a third party website if your prospect is using cookies, and that would track as well. But yeah, there are no limitations that I know of. It's a bit more complex to add those kind of parameters to Pardot links. So you would have to Pardot emails, you would have to add those parameters to the link manually when you build the email. As in the code, obviously. But yeah. Any other questions?
Have you worked with similar tools like SalesLoft or anything, so you can maybe point out benefits in comparison to others? So my impression is, okay, from my Salesforce perspective, not much Salesforce yet in there, right? But there must have been a reason why Salesforce was bought Pardot and not SalesLoft or one of the others. So what's kind of their USP here? Yeah,
so I've worked with a few others, like HubSpot, Marketo, MailChimp. The thing with Pardot is it's really user friendly. So it's very easy for just marketing end users who are not technical, have no CRM experience, etc., to use. So that's kind of the key reason.
Yeah. Okay. That's the pause for emphasis. Okay. Aber jetzt noch. Doch. Aber ich meine ganz ehrlich, wenn ich Altware einsetze, brauche meine Custom Objects anzubinden.
Hi, sorry. I've turned off the Wi-Fi. I'm using my hotspot now, so hopefully that will last better. So the real kind of strengths around Pardot in particular and now are those integrations, the automatic ROI tracking. They're rolling out business units which have a much nicer, you can filter out. We're going to be able to start doing much more. You have much more control over security access, etc., and the sync and who syncs. So that they would definitely be the strengths right now.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Well, in general, if you want to start getting deeper into Pardot, do you have any recommendations?
Okay. All right. What?
Last week was one.
So if there aren't any more questions, then thank you very much. It's been great speaking to you, and hope you enjoy the user group.
Okay, thanks a lot, Jessica, for joining us. And
Thank you.
big round of applause.
Bye.
Bye-bye.